I never imagined the loudest sound at my son's wedding would be the slap across my face. Music was playing. Glasses were clinking. 130 people were smiling, laughing, celebrating love. And there I was, standing near the edge of the dance floor, holding my small handbag, when my daughter-in-law stepped in front of me and changed my life with one movement of her hand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with how proud I felt that day. My son, Daniel, stood at the altar looking nervous in the same sweet way he did as a little boy on his first day of school. His suit was slightly too tight in the shoulders, but I didn't say anything. Mothers learn when to stay quiet. His bride, Vanessa, looked beautiful, truly. Elegant dress, perfect hair, confidence pouring off her like perfume. People often told me how lucky Daniel was, and I agreed. I sat in my seat during the ceremony with my hands folded, whispering a small prayer for their happiness. I had raised Daniel alone after his father passed, worked long hours, saved carefully, and lived modestly so my son could have opportunities I never did. Watching him start his own family felt like the closing of a long chapter. After the vows, the celebration moved to the hall. Toasts were made. Laughter echoed off the walls. I was sipping water, watching from a distance, content just to see Daniel smile. That's when Vanessa approached me. She didn't look angry. That's what confused me most. She looked calm, purposeful, like someone about to collect something she believed already belonged to her. "We should talk," she said, her smile tight. "Of course," I replied, assuming she wanted a kind word or a family photo. She leaned closer so only I could hear her. "You'll give me the keys to your apartment tonight," she said flatly. I laughed softly, thinking it was a joke. "I'm sorry. My parents think it's best," she continued. "Daniel shouldn't have to wait. You're alone. You don't need all that space." My heart skipped. "That apartment is my home." Her eyes hardened. "You can stay with us, or somewhere cheaper. But tonight, I want the keys." The music seemed to fade. I could feel people nearby, sense their presence, their joy. And yet, I felt suddenly very small. "I won't do that," I said quietly. That's when it happened. Her hand moved fast. Sharp, final. The sound cracked through the room like a dropped plate. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed nervously, unsure if it was part of the celebration. I tasted blood where my teeth had cut my lip. Vanessa leaned in again, her voice low. "Don't embarrass me." I looked past her then, at my son. Daniel stood frozen, eyes wide, saying nothing. Not a word, not my name. Something inside me settled. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I reached into my handbag, took out my phone, and turned toward the exit. As I walked out of that wedding hall alone, my cheek burning, one thought echoed in my mind. They thought I was weak, so I made a phone call, and 30 minutes later, someone arrived who would prove just how wrong they were. The night air outside the hall felt colder than it should have, or maybe my body was just catching up to what had happened. I stood under a streetlight, the music from inside muffled now, replaced by the sound of my own breathing. My hands were steady as I unlocked my phone. That surprised me. I had always thought a moment like that would break me. Instead, something very old and very solid rose up inside my chest. I didn't call my son. I didn't call a friend. I called a number I hadn't dialed in years. He answered on the second ring. "It's me," I said. There was a pause. Then his voice softened. "Are you all right?" "No," I replied honestly. "But I will be." I gave him the address and ended the call. No explanations. He didn't ask for any. He never had. I stayed outside for a while, listening to the distant laughter drifting through the doors. At one point, a guest stepped out to smoke and glanced at me with curiosity, then quickly looked away. No one came to check on me. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not even one of Daniel's friends who'd known me since he was a child. That hurt more than the slap. I walked slowly to my car and sat there, resting my hands on the steering wheel. Memories crowded in. Daniel at 7 years old, waiting on the front steps for me to come home from work. Daniel at 15, insisting I shouldn't pick him up in front of his friends. Daniel at 25, introducing Vanessa to me with that hopeful smile. I wondered when I'd stopped being his anchor and started becoming an inconvenience. 20 minutes passed. Then I saw it. A black sedan pulled into the lot, quiet and deliberate. A man stepped out, tall, neatly dressed, carrying himself with a calm authority that made people notice without knowing why. He paused, looked around, then spotted me. He walked over and nodded. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes." "I'm here," he said simply. We went back inside together. The music was louder now, the dance floor full. No one noticed us at first. Then someone did. I saw heads turn, whispers ripple through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Vanessa was in the center of it all, laughing, holding court like a queen. The man beside me stopped just short of the dance floor. "Would you like me to speak now?" he asked quietly. "Or would you prefer to do it yourself?" I looked at my son across the room. Our eyes met. For a split second, I saw fear there. Not anger, not confusion. Fear. "Now," I said. The man stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but carrying easily over the music. "May I have everyone's attention?" The DJ lowered the volume. Conversations died mid-sentence. Vanessa turned, her smile fading as she recognized me. Her eyes flicked to the man at my side, then back to my face. "What is this?" she snapped. The man adjusted his jacket. "My name is Michael Reynolds. I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Carter." A hush fell over the room. Vanessa laughed sharply. And, he continued, "I believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding property ownership, access rights, and acceptable conduct." My son stepped forward. "Mom, maybe this isn't the place." I finally spoke. "This is exactly the place," I said quietly. And as 130 guests leaned in to listen, I realized something important. I hadn't walked back into that hall for revenge. I walked back in for the truth. And once spoken, it wouldn't belong to me anymore. Silence spread through the hall like a held breath, and for the first time that evening, no one was smiling. Michael stood beside me, unhurried, his presence steady. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority has a way of announcing itself without sound. This wedding, he said calmly, is being held in a venue leased under Mrs. Carter's name. A murmur rippled through the room. Vanessa's smile twitched. That's not true. Michael opened a slim folder and held it up just enough for the front row to see. The contract was signed 6 months ago, paid in full. I felt my son shift beside her. And the apartment keys you demanded, Michael continued, belong to a property purchased and maintained solely by Mrs. Carter for the past 22 years. Vanessa's face flushed. Daniel doesn't own it, Michael said gently. You don't own it, and you never will. Gasps scattered like dropped glass. I looked at my son then, really looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mrs. Carter, Michael said, turning to me. Would you like me to proceed? I nodded once. He turned back to the room. Earlier this evening, Mrs. Carter was physically assaulted in front of witnesses. Vanessa laughed, sharp and brittle. You're exaggerating. Michael's gaze didn't waver. Several guests recorded the incident. Phones were already out, screens glowing. My daughter-in-law's confidence cracked, just slightly. At this time, Michael continued, we are offering Mrs. Carter the option to press charges. She has chosen not to. A collective exhale filled the hall. But, he added, this does not erase what occurred. I stepped forward then, my voice quiet but clear. I raised my son to be kind, I said. I raised him to protect, not to take. Tonight, I was asked to give up my home, my dignity, and my silence. Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. I will not live where I am not respected, I continued. And I will not pretend violence is love. I turned to Daniel. You didn't stop her, I said softly. That will stay with me longer than the slap. Tears filled his eyes, but he said nothing. Michael closed the folder. Mrs. Carter has decided to leave. The venue will remain available for the remainder of the event, as contracted. However, he paused. Any further harassment will be documented. I took my handbag and turned toward the exit. As I walked away, the crowd parted without a word. No applause, no whispers, just space. Outside, the cool air wrapped around me again. This time, it felt like relief. Michael opened the car door for me. You handled that with dignity, he said. I didn't do it for them, I replied. I did it for myself. As we drove away, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel, Mom, please. We need to talk. I stared out the window, the hall shrinking behind us, and thought about how many times I'd made excuses for silence. This time, I didn't reply, because the truth had finally been spoken out loud, and once you say it, you can never pretend you didn't hear it. I thought the hardest part was walking out of that wedding, But grief has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. The next morning, I woke before the sun, my cheek still tender, my heart heavier than my body felt. The house was quiet in that deep, hollow way only early mornings know. I made coffee out of habit, not desire, and sat at the small kitchen table where my son once did his homework, where scraped knees were kissed better, where promises were made without words. That's when the phone rang. Not a text this time, a call. Daniel. I let it ring longer than I should have, not out of cruelty, but because I needed to hear my own breathing before I heard his. Mom, he said the moment I answered. His voice cracked. Please, I didn't sleep. Vanessa didn't either. Everything got out of hand. Out of hand. That phrase landed like salt in a wound. You watched, I replied quietly. And you said nothing. He swallowed. I could hear it. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I closed my eyes. You knew, I said. You just didn't choose. Silence stretched between us. Can we come by? He finally asked. We need to talk. Vanessa wants to apologize. That word again. Wants. I looked around my kitchen, at the old curtains, the chipped mug, the life I'd built brick by brick, while teaching my son the difference between right and wrong. Come alone, I said. He hesitated. She's my wife. And I'm your mother, I replied. Or was. Another pause, then softly, I'll be there in an hour. When he arrived, he looked smaller somehow. Not younger, just diminished. The confidence he'd worn so proudly the day before had slipped off him like a coat that didn't fit. He sat at the table, didn't touch the coffee I poured. I didn't know about the keys, he said quickly. She didn't tell me she'd do that. But she did, I replied. And when she hit me, his eyes dropped. That moment, I continued, wasn't about a house. It was about who you chose to stand beside. Tears slid down his cheeks then, quiet and helpless. She says stress made her act that way. Wedding pressure, family expectations. I leaned forward. And what will the excuse be next time? He didn't answer. I reached into a drawer and placed a folded document on the table. He stared at it. What's this? He asked. My will, I said calmly. His head snapped up. Mom, I updated it last night. The color drained from his face. I'm not punishing you, I said gently. I'm protecting myself. He unfolded the paper with trembling hands. And as he read, his breath caught. Because some doors, once closed, don't slam. They shut quietly. And the sound echoes longer that way. I never planned to tell my son the truth that day. But truth has a way of stepping forward when silence becomes too heavy to carry. Daniel's hands shook as he held the papers. He read them twice, maybe 3 times, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder if he stared long enough. Mom, he whispered, you're cutting me out. I reached across the table, resting my hand near his, not touching. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I said. I'm cutting confusion out of my future. He looked up at me, eyes red, voice breaking. She didn't mean to hurt you. I nodded slowly. Intent doesn't erase impact. That stopped him. He'd never heard me speak like that before. I'd always been the woman who smoothed things over, who believed love could fix anything if you waited long enough. But waiting had cost me my dignity last night. I raised you to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, I continued. Yesterday, I was one of them. He pressed his palms into his eyes, fighting tears like a boy again. I love her, he said. I know, I replied, and that's exactly why this scares me. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street looked normal. Children waited for a school bus. A neighbor watered her flowers. Life moved forward without asking permission. Love shouldn't require you to become someone you don't recognize, I said, still facing the glass. If you ever feel smaller because of it, that's not love. That's fear wearing a nice dress. He stayed quiet. After a moment, he said, She says the apartment is ours anyway. That once we have kids, you won't need it. I turned around slowly. So that's the story now, I said. Not a request, not gratitude, ownership. He flinched at my tone. I worked 2 jobs to pay for this place, I went on. I skipped vacations. I ate dinners out of cans so you could have books, lessons, a future. That apartment is not leverage. It's the proof of my life. He nodded, ashamed. I didn't raise you to demand, I said softly. I raised you to earn. The room felt heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Daniel stood. I need to talk to her, he said. Really talk, I nodded. That's your work to do. At the door, he hesitated. Mom, is there any way to fix this? I looked at my son, my child, the boy I once carried on my shoulders so he could see fireworks better. There's always a way forward, I said, but it won't look like going backward. After he left, I sat alone for a long time. I thought about the phone call I'd made the night before, right after I walked out of that hall, about the man who'd promised me he'd handle things, and about the message I received just before Daniel knocked that morning. Because while my son was learning what it meant to be a husband, someone else was preparing to remind his wife exactly whose house she'd tried to take. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't stop arranging memories like old photographs spread across a table. I kept seeing my daughter-in-law's face at the wedding. Not the anger, not the slap, but the certainty. The kind that comes from believing the world will always bend your way. By morning, the message I'd received replayed in my head again and again. I'll be there today. Noon. Don't worry, just observe. I made tea and sat at my small kitchen table, hands wrapped around the warm cup, watching steam rise and disappear. I hadn't told Daniel about that call or that message. This wasn't something a son should have to manage. This was a lesson meant for someone else. At exactly 11:45, my phone rang. It's done, the man said calmly. May I proceed? Yes, I replied. Please do. I hung up and felt something unexpected settle in my chest. Peace, not revenge, not triumph, just peace. At noon sharp, my doorbell rang. opened it. There stood a tall man in a charcoal suit, neat haircut, polite smile. He carried a leather folder under one arm and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who never raised his voice because he never had to. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, "I'm here on behalf of the property." I stepped aside and let him in. He sat across from me at the table where I'd raised my son on homework and late-night talks. He laid the folder down carefully, as if even paper deserved respect. "I'll be meeting with your daughter-in-law this afternoon," he said. "And her parents." I nodded. "They'll listen." "They always do," he replied. He explained everything clearly, professionally. No threats, no drama, just facts, ownership, legal boundaries, consequences. When he stood to leave, he paused. "You didn't do anything wrong, you know," I smiled faintly. "I know. It just took me longer than it should have." After he left, I went for a walk. I passed the same wedding hall from the night before. Decorations were gone, balloons deflated, chairs stacked like the aftermath of a storm. Funny how celebrations vanish, but consequences linger. That evening, Daniel called. "Mom," he said, voice tight, "what did you do?" "I protected myself," I answered. Her parents had been furious, apparently, shocked, embarrassed, the kind of embarrassment that comes when entitlement meets reality. She had screamed, accused, cried, and then gone quiet. Daniel didn't defend her this time. He didn't attack her either. He just listened. "I didn't see it before," he admitted, "how she talks to people, how she assumes." "That's because love can blur things," I said gently. "It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." There was a long pause. "She wants you to apologize," he finally said. I laughed softly, not bitterly, not loudly, just once. "For what?" I asked. "For embarrassing her." "I didn't embarrass her," I replied. "She introduced herself." Another silence. "She's staying with her parents for now," he said. "That's probably wise." Before we hung up, Daniel said something that stayed with me. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I just wish it hadn't taken a slap for me to see you clearly." After the call, I sat by the window as the sun went down, painting the sky in colors that reminded me endings can be beautiful too. But this wasn't the end. Because the next morning, I received a message that told me exactly how far my daughter-in-law was willing to go, and how much more I still needed to protect. The message arrived just after sunrise, quiet as a whisper, but heavy as a stone. It wasn't from my son. It wasn't from her parents. It was from her. No greeting, no apology, just one sentence. "We need to talk. Today." Privately, I stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone down beside my coffee. I'd learned something over the years. Urgency is often a costume fear wears to stay in control. I finished my breakfast slowly. Toast, jam, the same routine I'd had long before weddings and slaps and lawyers entered my life. When I finally replied, I kept it simple. "You may come by this afternoon, 4 o'clock." She arrived 10 minutes early. I watched from the window as she stepped out of her car. No heels this time, no dramatic dress, just jeans and a sweater, arms folded tight against herself like she was bracing for cold weather that wasn't there. When I opened the door, she didn't look at me right away. "Come in," I said calmly. She sat on the edge of the chair, eyes darting around my modest living room as if she were seeing it for the first time. Perhaps she was. It's amazing how respect can change your eyesight. "I didn't know," she began quickly, "about the house, about all of it." I didn't answer. Silence, I've learned, invites truth to fill the space. "They made it sound like you were holding things back," she continued, "that you were being difficult, that you were just old-fashioned." Her voice cracked on that last word. I leaned back and folded my hands, and slapping me fit that story. She flinched. "I lost control," she whispered. "Everyone was watching. I felt humiliated." "I was humiliated too," I replied gently, "but I didn't raise my hand." She swallowed hard. "My parents think you set me up." I smiled sadly. "No, I let you speak freely. The rest was your doing." For the first time, she looked straight at me, really looked, not like an obstacle, not like an inconvenience, like a woman who had lived a full life before she entered the room. "I don't know how to fix this," she said quietly. "That depends," I answered, "on what you think is broken." She sat back, breathing shallowly. "I thought marriage meant security, stability, a future where we didn't struggle. And you thought taking what wasn't yours would guarantee that?" I asked. She didn't answer. I stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down an old photo album. I opened it to a picture of Daniel at 5 years old, missing a tooth, holding a cardboard sword. "This house," I said, tapping the page lightly, "was built from late nights and second jobs, from saying no when I wanted to say yes, from choosing patience over pride." She looked at the photo, then at me. "I never asked for gratitude," I continued, "only decency." Her shoulders sagged. "What do you want from me?" I met her eyes. "Respect and accountability." Tears slid down her cheeks. Real ones this time, not performance, not manipulation. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "afraid of losing him." "Then stop pushing away the people who love him," I said softly. She nodded slowly. When she left, she paused at the door. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the slap, for everything." I believed she meant it, but apologies are seeds, not harvests. Because later that night, Daniel called again, and what he told me made it clear that words alone wouldn't be enough to mend what had cracked. Daniel's voice on the phone sounded older than it had the day before, like something inside him had finally shifted out of place. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't tell you everything." I closed my eyes and listened, the way a mother does when she already knows the truth is going to hurt. "She didn't come to you on her own," he continued. "Her parents pushed her hard. That didn't surprise me. Control often travels in families like an heirloom no one questions. They told her that if we didn't secure the apartment, if we didn't lock down assets, we'd be fools," he said bitterly. They said you were weak, that you'd fold eventually. I let the words settle before responding. And what did you say to that? There was a long pause. I could almost see him rubbing his forehead, the way he used to when homework felt impossible. I stayed quiet, he admitted. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that it would work itself out. Silence again. That silence, I said gently, is why we're here. He exhaled shakily. I know, and I'm ashamed. That was the first honest thing he'd said since the wedding. He went on to tell me something else, something important. After I left the hall that night, after the slap and the murmurs and the sudden chill in the room, her parents had celebrated quietly, toasted, smiled. They believed they'd won. They thought you'd panic, Daniel said. Thought you'd call me begging to fix things. Or worse, that you'd give in. I smiled to myself. They'd mistaken age for weakness, a common error. But when the lawyer showed up, he continued, everything changed. Her father went pale. He started yelling about misunderstandings, about family unity. And your wife? I asked. She was shaking, Daniel said, not angry, not proud, just scared. That told me everything. Fear isn't always about losing love. Sometimes it's about losing control. Daniel's voice softened. Mom, I chose you today. I opened my eyes. What do you mean? I asked carefully. I told them we're moving out, he said. Into a small place. Something we can afford on our own. No apartments. No expectations. No leverage. My chest tightened, not with triumph, but with something deeper. Relief, perhaps, or grief for the lesson it took to get there. And your wife? I asked. She cried, he said honestly. She said I was choosing you over her. And what did you say? I said I was choosing decency, he replied. We sat in shared silence for a moment, miles apart, but closer than we'd been in weeks. I don't know if this marriage will survive, he added, but I know it won't survive lies. After we hung up, I sat alone in my living room as the afternoon light shifted across the walls. I thought about weddings and promises, and how easily people forget that love isn't proven by what you take, but by what you refuse to steal. Just as I stood to make tea, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Daniel, it was her mother. And the message she sent made it clear that the real confrontation was only just beginning. The message from her mother was short, polite, and cold in a way that only practiced control can be. We need to talk for the sake of the family. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the table. I had lived long enough to know that when people suddenly want to talk, it usually means they've lost their grip and are trying to tighten it again. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I brewed my tea slowly, the way I do when I need to remind myself that time still belongs to me. Steam rose from the cup, steady and calm. I thought about the wedding hall, the music cutting off, the sharp sting on my cheek. How silence had swallowed me whole in that moment, and how I had chosen not to scream. When I finally replied, I kept it simple. You may come tomorrow afternoon. 1 hour. They arrived exactly on time. Her parents stood outside my door dressed as if this were another negotiation. Her mother's smile was thin. Her father's eyes scanned the hallway, calculating. No apologies, no warmth, just purpose. I invited them in and offered tea. They declined. "We don't have much time," her mother said, settling into the chair across from me without being asked. "That's true," I replied evenly, "so let's not waste it." Her father leaned forward. "What happened at the wedding was unfortunate." Emotions ran high. I nodded. "Violence often does that." Her mother stiffened. "Let's not exaggerate. It was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated softly, "is mishearing a word, not raising a hand." Silence fell. She folded her hands. "We believe this can still be resolved for everyone's benefit." I looked at her calmly. "Explain." She spoke carefully, like someone used to being obeyed. "They suggested a compromise, shared ownership, a written agreement, something fair. You would still live there," she added quickly. "We aren't heartless." I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned back and studied them the way one studies strangers on a train. Briefly, clearly. "Let me tell you something," I said. "That apartment was bought with money I earned, not inherited, not gifted, earned. I lived simply so my son could grow without pressure." Her father frowned. "That's irrelevant now." "No," I said calmly. "It's everything." Her mother's patience snapped. "You're being difficult." I smiled gently. "No, I'm being finished." I stood and walked to the cabinet by the window. Inside was a folder I had prepared weeks ago, long before the wedding, when something in my bones told me this day would come. I placed it on the table. "Everything is documented," I said. "Ownership, trust arrangements, conditions, and the legal response to assault." Her mother's face drained of color. Her father flipped through the pages, faster and faster, his jaw tightening. "You planned this." "I prepared," I corrected. "There's a difference." They looked at me then, truly looked, for the first time. Not as a naive old woman, not as a resource, but as someone who could no longer be moved. "You'll tear the family apart," her mother whispered. I met her gaze. "No, I refuse to let it be built on cruelty." They left without another word. That evening, Daniel called again. His voice was steadier now. "I told her parents not to come back," he said. "Ever." I closed my eyes, feeling both the ache and the relief. But even as peace settled in, I knew one thing for certain. This story wasn't about property. It was about the moment. A woman decides she will never again confuse patience with permission. The days after that conversation felt strangely quiet, as if the world had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Daniel and his wife moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, no polished floors or views worth bragging about. Just 2 rooms, a narrow balcony, and the weight of consequences settling in gently but firmly. He came to see me the following Sunday. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him, not because he looked different, but because he stood straighter, older, as though the boy who once hid behind me had finally stepped into his own shadow. "I didn't bring flowers," he said awkwardly. "Didn't know if that felt right." "Then you chose correctly," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug I poured for him. For a while, neither of us spoke. Some silences don't beg to be filled, they ask to be respected. "She hasn't spoken much," he said finally. "She's angry, confused, hurt." I nodded. "Those feelings need space, not arguments." He looked at me. "Do you hate her?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't hate anyone. Hate takes energy I no longer waste." He swallowed. "I should have stopped it. The slap, the demand, all of it." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have." He didn't flinch. He deserved the truth without decoration. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of choosing wrong." I reached across the table and rested my hand over his. "Sometimes choosing right feels like losing everything you were trying to protect." His eyes filled, but he didn't cry. He told me she had begun therapy, something her parents never believed in, that she was questioning things she'd been taught since childhood. That for the first time, she wasn't sure who she was without control. "Change hurts," I said quietly, "especially when it threatens comfort." Before he left, he stood in the doorway and hesitated. "They want me to apologize to them," he said. "Her parents, for embarrassing them." "And will you?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I apologized to the wrong person for too long." That night, I sat alone in my living room and replayed everything, not the slap, not the humiliation, but the moment I chose myself without shouting, without revenge, without spectacle. Strength doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a locked door that never opens again. A week later, I received a letter, handwritten, unexpected. It was from my daughter-in-law. She didn't apologize at first. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She wrote about fear, about pressure, about learning too late that love built on fear collapses the moment fear fails. At the bottom, she wrote one line: "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I needed you to know I'm trying to be better." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same folder where the legal papers once rested. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a door you kick open. It's a window you leave unlocked, just in case. And as I turned off the lights that night, I knew the hardest lesson of all had finally been taught. Not to them, but to me. There is a kind of peace that only comes after you stop explaining yourself. I felt it one quiet morning as I watered the small plants by my window. The sun just beginning to warm the floor. Nothing dramatic had changed on the outside. Same apartment, same streets, same slow creak in my knees when I bent down. But inside, something had settled into place. Daniel began visiting regularly, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. We talked about ordinary things: work, traffic, a neighbor's loud dog. And sometimes, when the moment felt right, we talked about harder things too. He told me he was learning how to speak up before resentment took root. How silence, when used to avoid conflict, can quietly turn into betrayal. He said marriage counseling was teaching him something unexpected, that choosing your partner does not mean abandoning your values. I listened. Mostly, I was proud. As for his wife, she kept her distance, not out of anger, but humility. Some wounds need space to heal without performance. She sent a short message once, thanking me for the letter I never replied to. That was intentional. Not every step forward needs an audience. People sometimes ask me if I regret not calling the police that night, if I regret not making a scene, if I regret walking out quietly. I don't, because power doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like knowing exactly when to step back so the truth can step forward on its own. I kept my home, but more importantly, I kept my dignity, and Daniel learned something no inheritance could ever teach him. That respect is not requested in moments of comfort, but revealed in moments of tension. I've learned in my many years that aging doesn't make you invisible. It simply reveals who was never really looking at you in the first place. If you are listening to this and you've ever felt small in your own family, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not weak because you stayed quiet. You are not foolish because you trusted. And you are not obligated to tolerate disrespect just because it comes dressed as family. Love without respect is not love. It's control wearing a familiar face. These days, when I sit in my living room and the television hums softly in the background, I smile to myself. Not because I won something, but because I no longer need to prove anything. The greatest victory of all is knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.